The call came at 11:43 at night, and Myra Cole almost did not answer it. She was already in her boots, which was the only reason she picked up the phone at all. She had been standing at the window of her small clinic, watching the rain come off the mountain in sheets, listening to the sound it made against the tin roof, a sound like someone running on gravel who could not stop themselves. She was not thinking about anything in particular. She was doing what she often did at this hour, which was nothing, and doing it well. The number that appeared on her screen belonged to a road crew dispatcher she had worked with twice before. Both times it had been bad. A deer with a broken spine blocking the highway near the south curve. A red fox that had been clipped by a passing truck and dragged itself into the drainage ditch, where it stayed for 2 days before someone finally called. Myra answered. "We have something on Route 9, the dispatcher said. His name was Gary, and he sounded the way he always sounded, not alarmed but careful, like a man choosing his words from a very short list. Big animal, black, hurt bad. 2 of my crew tried to move it and it put one of them on the ground." "How big?" Myra said. There was a pause, bigger than you'd expect. She was already pulling her coat off the hook by the door. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. It took her 15 because the rain on Route 9 was not rain anymore. It was a moving wall of water that came down the mountain and crossed the road without asking permission. Her headlights made it worse, turning everything ahead of her into a bright white nothing. She drove slowly and leaned forward and did not think about turning back, because turning back was not something she practiced. She found the road crew's orange hazard lights first, 2 trucks parked diagonally across the shoulder, their lights blinking in and out of the rain. Gary was standing outside in a yellow slicker, holding a flashlight pointed at the ground. He was a broad man, the kind who looked like he had been built for weather, and even he was looking at whatever was in the grass beside the road, with the expression of someone who was not entirely sure they were in the right place. Myra parked and got out. "There," Gary said, and aimed the flashlight. She saw it and stopped walking. The animal was black, black the way certain things are black, not as a color but as an absence of something else. It was lying on its side in the wet grass about 4 feet from the road's edge, and it was large. Myra had worked with wolves before, in the year she had spent at a wildlife rehabilitation center up north, before she came back to Ironville and opened her own clinic. She knew what a large wolf looked like. She knew the difference between a big animal and an animal that made you recalibrate what big meant. This was the second kind. Even lying down, even in the rain, even with its eyes shut and its breathing coming in shallow pulls that she could see from 10 feet away, the animal occupied space in a way that made the space around it feel smaller. Its coat was soaked flat against its body. On its left side, just behind the shoulder, there was a wound. Not a bite, she could see that much from here. Something mechanical, a trap maybe, or a piece of old fencing caught in the flooding. Whatever it was had gone in deep and come out worse. "How long has it been here?" she said. "We found it about 40 minutes ago. It was trying to move when we first got here." "That's when Danny got knocked down." "It wasn't." Gary stopped, tried again. "It wasn't acting like an injured animal. It was acting like an injured animal that was very angry about being injured." "That's what injured animals do," Myra said. She was already moving, slowly, angling toward the wolf's head so it could see her if it was awake. "Did anyone call animal control?" "They're not coming out in this weather. They said to wait until morning." Myra did not say what she thought about that. She crouched down about 6 feet from the wolf's head and waited. The wolf's eye opened. One eye, the left one. It was pale gold, almost amber, and it looked at her with a clarity that was not what she expected from an animal this badly hurt. Most injured animals looked through you, past you, into some middle distance where the pain lived. This one looked at her, directly, like it was deciding something. She held still. "Hey," she said quietly, I know this is not what you wanted tonight." The wolf's breathing did not change, but the eye did not close either. "I'm going to get closer," she said. "I'm going to try to help you. You can be angry about it later." She moved forward on her knees, ignoring the mud and the cold water soaking through her jeans. She did not reach out yet. She just got close enough to see the wound properly, close enough to smell the iron salt smell of blood mixing with rain. Close enough to see that the wound was not fresh. It had been bleeding for a while, and the blood had gone dark at the edges where it was beginning to clot, but there was still too much of it, and the animal had clearly been moving with this wound for longer than it should have. She looked back at Gary. "I need my supply bag from the truck, blue case, passenger side floor." He went without arguing, which she appreciated. She turned back to the wolf. It was still watching her. The one open eye had not moved. "Okay," she said, "I need you to let me do this. I'm going to make it hurt a little more before it hurts less. That's how this works. I'm sorry about that part." Gary came back with the blue case. She opened it without looking away from the wolf, found what she needed by touch. She had packed and repacked this case so many times that her hands knew it better than her eyes did. She prepared a mild sedative, not enough to put a wolf this size fully under, just enough to take the sharpest edge off the pain response so she could get close enough to work. The wolf did not move when she administered it. Not a flinch, not a pull away. It watched her, and then the gold of its eye softened slightly, and she felt something release in the air between them, not trust exactly, but something adjacent to trust, something that said, "I have decided to let you try." She worked for 23 minutes in the rain beside Route 9 with Gary holding the flashlight over her shoulder, and neither of them saying much of anything. The wound was deep but had missed anything vital. She could determine that much with her hands and her training, and the experience of having made these assessments in conditions that were never as clean or as well lit as they should be. She packed it and dressed it as well as she could in the field. It would need proper surgery, proper cleaning, a real table and real light and real equipment, but she could get it to that point. The problem was getting the animal into her truck. "Gary," she said, "I need help lifting." He looked at the wolf, he looked at Myra. He was not a small man, and he was not a coward, but he looked at the wolf with the expression of someone being asked to carry a piece of furniture that was too large for the staircase. "It won't hurt you right now," she said. "It's sedated." "You said mild sedative." "Mild enough." He sighed the sigh of a man who had agreed to more than he bargained for on a Tuesday night in November, and he crouched down beside her, and together they got the tarp from her truck bed and positioned it. And then they began the slow, difficult, rain-soaked work of moving 200 pounds of wolf from the wet grass to the truck. It was not graceful, it was not quick. There was mud involved, and at one point Gary lost his footing and went down on one knee and said a word that Myra chose not to hear, and the wolf made a sound low in its chest that was not a growl but was related to one. But they got it done. They always got it done. That was the thing about necessary work. It did not care whether you were ready or comfortable or dry. It waited until you finished, and then it let you feel whatever you needed to feel. Myra strapped the tarp down in the truck bed, arranging the wolf's weight as carefully as she could, checking the dressing one more time. The bleeding had slowed. The breathing was steadier than it had been. The pale gold eye was closed now. She stood up and looked at Gary. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. He was wiping mud off his hands onto his slicker, which was not helping anything. "You need someone to follow you back." "No," she looked at the wolf in her truck bed. The rain was still coming down. "I've got it from here." She drove back slowly, even slower than she had driven out. Every curve and dip in the road felt like a threat to the animal in her bed, and she navigated around them the way she navigated around most things she was trying to keep alive, with patience that looked like stubbornness from the outside, and attention that looked like calm. Her clinic sat at the end of a gravel road that turned off Route 7 about 2 miles from the edge of Ironville proper. She had built it herself, or mostly herself. The framing she had hired out, but everything inside, the layout, the equipment arrangement, the lighting, the built-in kennels and the 2 surgical tables, and the storage system she had designed for exactly this kind of late-night retrieval, all of that was hers. People who visited for the first time were usually surprised by how well organized it was. People who knew Myra were not surprised at all. She backed the truck up to the clinic's side door and took a breath before she got out. The wolf was going to be hard to move alone. There was no Gary here, no second set of hands. There was just the gravel, the rain, the side door that opened inward if she propped it right, and about 40 feet between the truck and the first surgical table. She propped the door. She pulled the ramp she kept for exactly this kind of situation. She began. It took her a long time. She did not stop to think about how long it was taking or how much her back was going to feel this tomorrow or how the rain was getting into her collar no matter how she hunched her shoulders. She moved the wolf in stages, resting when she needed to rest, adjusting her grip, finding the angles that worked. The wolf was breathing steadily. That was what she kept coming back to, steady breathing. It was still here. That meant she had to be still here too. When she finally got the wolf onto the table, under the lights, she stood for a moment with her hands braced on her knees and just breathed. Then she put on fresh gloves and got to work. The surgery took just over an hour. Clean it, close it, check for anything she had missed in the field. The wound was bad, but it was honest. It did not hide what it was. A piece of old metal, from the look of the wound pattern, probably barbed wire caught in the flooding, driven in by the animal's own movement. The kind of injury that happened when a creature was running hard and did not see what was in the water. She finished suturing at 2:37 in the morning. She put a warming blanket over the wolf and sat down in the chair in the corner and looked at it. It was still enormous. Even on the table, even still, it was the largest wolf she had ever seen, and she had seen wolves that most people in this county would not believe existed. Its black coat, now dry under the warming blanket, had a depth to it that was unusual, not exactly a sheen, but something that caught the clinic light differently than it should have. Its breathing was even, clean. She should have gone to bed. She had a folding cot in the back room that she used on nights like this, when the work ran too late or the animal was too critical to leave alone. She should have set an alarm and closed her eyes for a few hours. Instead, she sat in the chair and watched the wolf breathe. She was not sure later how long she sat there. She was not sure what she was thinking exactly, or whether she was thinking at all. There was something about the animal on her table that held her attention in a way she could not explain and did not try to. Some quality of presence. Even unconscious, even wrapped in a blanket, it had that quality, the sense that it was not simply occupying the space, but filling it deliberately, the way a person fills a room when they walk in knowing where they are going. At some point the rain changed. Not stopped. It did not stop that night, but changed in character, becoming lighter, more even, less like an argument and more like a statement. At some point Myra's eyes closed. She was still in the chair when the first gray light of morning came through the clinic window. She woke with a stiff neck and the specific kind of tired that lives behind the eyes, and she looked immediately at the table. The wolf was still breathing. She stood up and crossed the room and stood beside the table and looked at the animal properly in daylight, which was a different thing than looking at it under surgical lights or in the beam of Gary's flashlight. In daylight it looked, she searched for the right word and came up with impossible. Not impossible in the sense of unreal. Impossible in the sense of something exceeding what the word wolf was built to contain. She checked the wound. Clean. No sign of infection yet, which meant nothing in the long term but meant something right now. She adjusted the warming blanket. She checked the pulse, which was slower than she would expect, steadier than she would expect, and which she wrote in her records as unexplained relative bradycardia, consistent with stress response, monitoring ongoing. She put the kettle on in the small back room. She stood at the clinic window with her coffee and looked at the fence line at the edge of her property. She could see, through the still falling rain, through the gray morning light, the shape of a person standing at the fence. Still not moving, just standing there in the rain at the edge of her property, facing the clinic. She looked at them for a long moment. Then she looked back at the wolf on the table. She drank her coffee. Outside, the rain did not stop, the figure at the fence did not move. And the wolf on her table breathed in and breathed out, and the sound of it was steadier than anything else in the room. Myra set her cup down and began writing her morning notes. She wrote down what she knew and left space for what she did not know yet, which was most of it. That was how she always started, with the space for what was coming. The figure at the fence was still there at noon. Myra had checked 3 times, not because she was worried, but because the persistence of it was unusual in a way that her mind kept returning to, the way your tongue returns to a loose tooth, not urgently, just compulsively, just to confirm the thing is still there. She had patience at 11. A barn owl that a family out on Miller Road had found tangled in netting, one wing extended at an angle that was not an angle wings were supposed to make. She set it, splinted it, showed the family how to check the dressing, told them to call in 3 days. She had the quiet, efficient manner she always had with the people who brought her animals, focused but not cold, informative but not clinical in the way that made people feel they were being processed. She liked people. She had just arranged her life, so she did not need a great many of them. After the family left, she went back to the window. The figure had not moved. She could not make out much detail from this distance, especially with the rain between them still coming lower now, a thin gray curtain rather than the wall it had been last night. She could see that it was a man, she could see that he was tall, she could see that he was not sheltering from the rain, not huddling, not shifting his weight the way cold and wet people shift their weight when they are waiting for something to end. He was simply standing, the way structures stand. the way things that are not going anywhere stand. She made a second cup of coffee and did not bring it out. She went back to the wolf. The wolf had not moved, not in any way she could verify, but the quality of its stillness had changed. When she had sat with it in the early morning hours, it had the stillness of an animal deeply under, the dense quietness of something that has gone somewhere inside itself and left the body behind as a placeholder. Now the stillness was different. It was present. The animal was in its body again, even if it had not opened its eyes, even if no part of it had shifted under the warming blanket. She felt the difference the way she felt most things in this clinic, not through any specific signal she could name, but through the accumulated experience of sitting with enough hurt animals to know the difference between one that is getting worse and one that is getting better. This one was getting better. She stood at the table and felt something release in her chest that she had not realized she was holding. "Good," she said to the wolf, just the one word. She went about the rest of her afternoon. She had records to update, supplies to reorder, 2 phone calls to return. She ate lunch standing at the counter, a sandwich she had made without paying much attention to what she was putting in it, which resulted in something that was technically food. She worked. The rain thinned a little and then thickened again. At 3 in the afternoon, she went to the porch with her coffee and looked at the fence. The man was still there. He was looking directly at her. She looked back. From here she could see him more clearly. He was tall enough that she had to estimate, because sometimes the way a person holds themselves adds height and sometimes it takes it away, and this man was the first kind. He wore dark clothing that the rain had made darker. His hair was wet and pushed back from his face. His face was, she tried for a word and landed on composed, not blank, composed. The way a piece of music is composed before it is performed, held deliberately in a particular shape. He did not look away when she looked at him. She held eye contact. In her experience, the person who held eye contact longest in a standoff like this was not necessarily the more confident person. Sometimes they were the angrier person. Sometimes they were the more desperate person. Sometimes they were just the person who had more to prove. This man did not look like he was proving anything. He looked like he was waiting for something that he had decided, a long time ago, he was willing to wait for indefinitely. After what felt like a long time, he dropped his gaze. Not quickly, not in the way of someone who lost the contest. Slowly, deliberately, like he was doing it because he chose to and for no other reason. Myra went back inside. She did not know what to make of him yet, so she put him in the same place she put most things she did not yet understand, in a kind of waiting room inside her attention, where they could sit quietly until she had more information. It was not a comfortable room, and it was not meant to be. But things that could not wait tended to make themselves known. She checked on the wolf at 4. Its eyes were open. Both of them this time, the same pale gold as before, but sharper now, less filtered. They tracked her as she moved to the side of the table. She moved slowly and she did not make eye contact immediately. You did not make direct eye contact with a wolf that had just woken up and was trying to establish where it was. You let it find you in its peripheral vision first, let it process the room, let it arrive at the conclusion that this was not an immediate threat before you gave it something direct to respond to. She busied herself checking the dressing, speaking quietly as she worked. "You've been out for about 14 hours, she said. "The wound is closed and there's no sign of infection. You're going to be sore. That's not something I can fix, but it will get better." The wolf watched her. She glanced at its face. The eyes had not moved from her. There was something in the quality of that attention, not the glazed, over-wide stare of a frightened animal, not the flat, defensive gaze of an animal calculating an exit. Something that belonged to a different category. Something that was patient in the way that intelligence is patient. "Are you hungry?" she said. "I have." She almost said something apologetic about her supplies. "I'll get you something." She had venison in the freezer, from a deer that had died of natural causes on a property 3 miles away and whose owner had called her because he did not know what else to do. She had kept it for situations like this. She thawed a portion in warm water, which was faster than it should have been but necessary, and brought it to the table. The wolf ate. Not ravenously, not desperately, not the way an animal eats when it has been without food for too long. It ate with a deliberateness that she found, objectively, remarkable, like it was choosing to accept the food rather than needing to. She sat in the corner chair and watched it eat and felt the strange, specific satisfaction of that. The satisfaction that had no name in any language she spoke, but which was the entire reason she did this work. At 5:30 she went to lock the front gate of the gravel road that led to her property. She did this every evening at dusk. It was a habit she had developed not out of fear, but out of the natural desire not to have strangers pull up to her clinic unannounced in the middle of the night. The gate was simple, iron, hinged, padlocked. It took her 30 seconds. She was on her way back to the clinic when she heard the sound. It was low and brief, and came from the direction of the fence line, and it was not a sound that an animal makes. It was human, or close enough to human that the distinction felt technical. It was the sound of someone shifting position after holding very still for a very long time. She stopped walking. She turned toward the fence. He was still there. He was looking at her now with an expression that she could not read from this distance except to say that it was very focused, not threatening, not pleading. Focused the way a compass is focused, there was something it was pointing at, and it was pointing at her clinic, and his face was only incidentally somewhere near the front of that direction. She walked toward him. She stopped about 10 feet from the fence, on her side of it. He was even taller up close. She had estimated 6'3" and was probably right. His eyes were dark gray, she thought, or something close to it, the kind of color that changed depending on the light and did not commit to a specific answer. His jaw was set. His hands were loose at his sides. He was completely soaked and appeared to have made no decisions whatsoever about being cold. "You've been standing there since this morning," Myra said. He said, "Yes." His voice was lower than she expected, and even across the fence in the rain it was clear and unhurried, not the voice of someone who was used to raising it to be heard. "Is there something you want?" she said. He looked past her briefly at the clinic, then back at her. "There is an animal in your facility," he said. "There are several animals in my facility," she said. "That is generally what a wildlife clinic contains." Something moved across his expression, not quite amusement, the shadow of a recognition of something that might, under different circumstances, have been amusement. "The wolf," he said. She looked at him. "The wolf I retrieved from Route 9 at midnight in last night's flooding." "Yes, that you're already aware of," she said. He did not say anything. "Are you going to tell me why you've been standing at my fence in the rain for 8 hours?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. The rain made a sound between them, which was the only sound between them, and she let it be a sound between them for as long as was required. "I wanted to know he was going to be all right," the man said. She studied his face. She said. "Yes, you know this wolf." He looked at her directly. "He belongs to me." Myra was quiet for a moment, the way she was quiet when someone said something that required her to sort out a few things before she could respond to it. "Wild wolves," she said carefully, "don't belong to people." "This one does," he said, and there was something in the way he said it that was not possessive, exactly, not the way a person talks about owning a thing. It was more like the way a person says the word family, like belonging was a different kind of word than she was using. She looked at him for a long moment. "He is going to be all right," she said. "Barring complications, which I do not expect, he needs rest and time, both of which he will get here." The man was quiet. "You could come back tomorrow," she said. He did not say that he would. He did not say that he would not. He looked at her clinic with that same focused, unwavering quality, like the building itself was the thing he was speaking to. "Thank you," he said. He said it simply, without ceremony, like a person who had thought carefully about whether to say it and had decided yes. She nodded once and walked back toward her clinic. At the door she stopped and turned back. He was still at the fence, still looking at the building. She went inside. That night she sat with the wolf again in the corner chair with the lamp on low. The wolf was awake and watching the window, not the door, the window, like it was listening for something outside that she could not hear. She could hear the rain. "He was there all day," she said to the wolf, not asking, just saying. The wolf did not respond in any verifiable way, but it stopped looking at the window and looked at her instead, and the pale gold of its eyes was very calm, and very clear, and very old in a way that had nothing to do with the animal's actual age. She did not sleep in the chair this time. She set up the cot in the back room, set her alarm for 2 in the morning so she could check the dressing and lay down. Through the thin wall she could hear the wolf's breathing, even and steady. Through the clinic window, if she had gone to look, she would have seen the fence line empty now in the dark and the rain, the man gone, the space where he had stood all day just space again. But she felt, in the specific and unreasonable way that some things are felt rather than known, that gone was not quite the right word for it. She closed her eyes. The rain continued. He knocked on the door of her clinic at 8 in the morning, and she opened it because she had heard him coming up the gravel road 4 minutes before he arrived, and had decided, in those 4 minutes, that she was going to open the door when he knocked. He was cleaner than he had been at the fence, still wearing dark clothing but dry now, or at least not actively wet. He had shaved, which changed his face in a way she could not entirely account for, because the stubble had suggested something, and its absence suggested something different, and she was not yet sure which of those two things was more accurate. He stood on her doorstep with his hands loose at his sides, the same as before, and he said, "My name is Selim." Just that, no last name offered, no extension of a hand for shaking, his name as a single, complete piece of information. Myra looked at him. "Myra Cole," she said. He nodded once, like he already knew. She stepped back from the door, which was not precisely an invitation, but was close enough that a person, with the kind of composure he appeared to have, would understand what it meant. He came inside. He did not look around the clinic the way most people looked around the clinic, cataloging it, assessing it, deciding what they thought about it. He walked straight toward the table where the wolf lay, moving carefully in the way large people who are aware of being large move in other people's spaces, and he stopped at a respectful distance and looked at the wolf. The wolf looked back at him. What passed between them in that moment was something Myra could not name, not because she lacked the vocabulary for animal behavior or human-animal relationships. She had more of that vocabulary than most people she knew, but because what she was seeing did not fit neatly into any of the categories her vocabulary was built around. It was not the reunion of a person and a pet. It was not the professional assessment of a handler looking at an animal in their care. It was closer to the way two people look at each other when one of them has been seriously hurt and the other one has been waiting for word of whether they survived. She stood back and let it be what it was. After a long moment, Selim reached out and placed his hand on the wolf's head. The wolf closed its eyes. He left his hand there for a few seconds, then withdrew it. He turned to Myra. "Tell me about the wound," he said. She told him. She was precise and clear, the way she was with everyone who asked her about the animals in her care. No softening, no unnecessary comfort, just accurate information delivered at the speed that was useful. She told him what she had found on Route 9, what she had assessed, what the surgery had involved, what the recovery timeline looked like, what the risk factors were going forward. He listened without interrupting. She appreciated that. When she was done, he said, "What do you need from me?" The question was so direct that it caught her slightly off guard, not because she was not used to direct questions, but because the phrasing of it was unusual. Not "what can I do?" Not "what are the fees?" "What do you need from me?" Like she was the one who had been put in a difficult position and he was trying to find the best way to address it. "Nothing right now," she said. "The animal is stable. I will monitor him for the next several days. When he is strong enough to move safely, we can discuss what happens next." Selim nodded. "I'll be here." She looked at him, here meaning. "Where I was yesterday," he said. "The fence line. I won't enter your property without being asked." She absorbed this. "That's not necessary," she said. "You don't have to stand outside in the rain." "I know," he said, and there was something in the simplicity of those two words that stopped her from saying more, because he was not standing outside in the rain because he had to. He was standing outside in the rain because it was the right edge of her space, and he was placing himself at it deliberately, and she understood without further explanation that this was not about the weather. She showed him out. She stood on the porch for a moment after he left, with the morning air and the thin, persistent rain, and listened to the sound of his steps on the gravel going away from her clinic. Then she went back inside and stood beside the wolf. "Who is he?" she said. The wolf looked at her with its pale gold eyes. "That's what I thought," she said. She called Dollars at 10. Dollars Webb lived in the nearest house to Myra's property, which was still about a mile away on the other side of the old Miller orchard. She was 63 and had lived in Ironville her whole life, the kind of person who contained within her the entire history of the place, the way some people carry the history of a family, not always consciously, not always accurately, but completely. She knew things about Ironville that were not written anywhere. She knew the things people said when they thought no one important was listening. She also, as it happened, showed up at Myra's clinic every few weeks with a covered dish of something that Myra had not asked for and would not have thought to make herself. And she spent exactly 45 minutes there each time, not a minute more, because she said she had things to do and she meant it. When Myra called, Dollars picked up on the second ring. "I have a question for you," Myra said, "about Ironville territory, the pack." There was a brief pause. "What about them?" "A man came to my clinic this morning. His name is Selim. He says the wolf I brought in last night belongs to him." Another pause, longer this time. "Salem," Dollars said. "Yes, sir." "Tall, dark eyes." "Yes, sir." Dollars was quiet in the way that people who are deciding how much to say are quiet. It had a specific texture, different from the quiet of someone who did not know what to say. "I'm going to come by," Dollars said. "Not today, tomorrow I'll bring soup." "I don't need soup," Myra said. "I'm bringing soup," Dollars said and hung up. She arrived the next morning at 9 with a pot of beef barley that she placed on Myra's counter without ceremony, and she sat down at Myra's kitchen table and folded her hands and looked at Myra with the expression she wore when she was going to say something she had thought carefully about. "The Ironville pack," Dollars said, "has been here longer than the town has been called Ironville. You know that." "I know there are packs in this territory, yes," Myra said. She sat down across from Dollars. "I try to stay clear of the politics." "You've been staying clear very successfully for 4 years," Dollars said, "which is an achievement given where your clinic sits." She paused. "Selim is not like the others. He is the alpha of Ironville pack, but alpha is not quite the right word for what he is because the word alpha has become," she searched for it, "ordinary. It has become a word for a kind of aggressive man who makes a lot of noise. Selim is not that." "What is he?" Myra said. Dollars looked at her hands. "He holds 3 territories. In 40 years there has not been an alpha who held 3 territories without war. The ones who tried either made too many enemies or made too many promises they could not keep." She looked up. "He made neither. He simply made it clear very quietly that certain things were not going to happen in his territory and they did not happen. People stopped testing him after a while. Even the packs that didn't like him stopped testing him." Myra thought about the man who had stood at her fence all day in the rain, without asking for anything. "The wolf," Dollars continued, "the one you brought in." "Yes, sir." "What does he look like, the wolf?" "Large black coat, pale gold eyes." Dollars nodded slowly. "His second." Myra waited. "The person closest to an alpha in pack structure is the second, the one who would step into that role if something happened. The one who stands between the alpha and." Dollars paused, choosing words carefully. "Certain things," she looked at Myra. "For Selim, his second is more than that. They grew up together. They are brothers in every sense that matters." Myra sat with this. "So when he stood at my fence," she said, "for an entire day in the rain." "He would not leave," Dollars said simply. "He couldn't. He said the wolf belongs to him." Dollars made a small sound. "He would say that. He doesn't know another word for it." Myra looked at the window. Outside, the rain had gone quiet for the first time in 2 days. The air had the particular pale quality of a winter morning, deciding whether to become something better or something worse. "What should I know," Myra said, "that I don't know yet?" Dollars looked at her for a long moment. "I think," she said carefully, "that Selim Ashford showing up at your door is not a small thing. I think you should be aware of that without being frightened of it. And I think you should keep doing exactly what you are doing, which is taking care of what is in your clinic and making your own decisions about everything else." "That is very carefully not an answer," Myra said. "It is the most accurate answer I can give you right now," Dollars said. She stood up. "The soup needs 40 minutes on low heat." She left. Myra sat at the kitchen table for a while longer. Then she went and checked on the wolf. He was awake and his eyes were on the window, and he was doing the thing she had noticed him doing since he regained consciousness, listening to something outside that she could not hear. She had begun to understand that this was not restlessness and it was not distress. It was simply awareness. He was aware of something outside the building at all times and he was not troubled by it. He was just attentive to it. She changed his dressing. He tolerated it without complaint, watching her hands as she worked with an expression she could only describe as attentive patience, the expression of someone who understands exactly what is happening and is deciding to allow it. "You're not going to tell me anything either," she said. The wolf blinked, which she took as its own kind of non-answer. That afternoon, she went out to her porch with a second mug of coffee. Salem was at the fence. She walked down the porch steps and across the yard and stopped at the fence on her side, close enough to speak without raising her voice. She held out the mug. He looked at it, then at her. "It's getting cold standing there," she said. She was not entirely sure why she was doing this. She was not a person who gave things to people she did not know. She was a person who fed injured wolves and answered calls at midnight and worked alone by choice, and she was standing at her own fence in the rain handing coffee to a stranger who had been watching her building for 2 days. He reached across the fence and took the mug. He held it with both hands, and she saw, briefly, the way his shoulders changed when the warmth reached his palms, not a dramatic shift, just a small easing, the kind of thing you would miss if you were not paying the right kind of attention. She was paying the right kind of attention. "He's doing well," she said. "Ate again this morning. The wound site looks clean." Salem nodded. He was looking at his coffee. "Dollar's web tells me you're the alpha of the Ironville pack," Myra said. He looked up at her. "She said it like it was a title," Myra said, "but she also said alpha isn't quite the right word. I'm curious what the right word is." He was quiet for a moment. "There isn't one in the language you're using," he said. She considered this. "Then tell me what it means in the language you're using." He looked at her for a long time. The rain had gone thin again, barely there, the kind of rain that is more feeling than fact. His gray eyes were steady and unreadable and not unkind. "Responsible," he said finally. "It means responsible." She took that in, for 3 territories. For everything in them. She looked at the clinic, including a wolf who ends up trapped in flood debris on Route 9. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, something older than guilt. The expression of someone who has had a very long time to know that the things they are responsible for do not always stay safe just because they should. "Yes," he said. "Including that." She held out her hand for the empty mug when he was done with it, and he passed it back across the fence. She looked at him. "You can come inside tomorrow," she said. "For 10 minutes, he'll be glad to see you." She turned and walked back to her clinic. Behind her at the fence, she heard nothing except the quiet of a man who had gotten something he was not going to express gratitude for in any obvious way, because expressing it in an obvious way would have been smaller than what it was. She understood that. She was the same kind of person. She went inside and shut the door and stood for a moment with her hand on the latch. She did not know, standing there, that the 10 minutes would become 20, and the 20 would become an afternoon, and the afternoon would become a pattern, and the pattern would become the structure around which the rest of everything would arrange itself. She did not know any of that yet. She just stood at the door and breathed, and somewhere behind her in the clinic, the wolf breathed too, steady and clear, and the day outside continued its quiet work of becoming evening. He came at 9 in the morning, as she had said he could. She did not go to the door when she heard his steps on the gravel. She was at the surgical table rechecking a suture that had looked slightly raised the evening before. It turned out to be nothing, just the normal tension of healing tissue, but she liked to be sure. She called out that it was unlocked and she heard him come in, and she heard him pause just inside the door the way people paused when they entered her clinic for the first time. Not because it was impressive exactly, but because it was more organized than they expected, more deliberate, more clearly the workspace of a person who had thought very carefully about what they needed and arranged everything to provide it. She finished checking the suture, then she stepped back and let Salem reach the table. The wolf's tail moved, once. Low, controlled, nothing like the exuberant full-body wag of a domestic dog, just a single slow sweep that said, "You are here, I know you are here, and that is good." Salem stood beside the table and put his hand on the wolf's head again, the same gesture as yesterday, and the wolf's eyes closed. Myra stood at a distance and did not say anything for a while. After a few minutes, Selim said, without turning around, "He's stronger than yesterday." "Yes," she said. "How much longer does he need to stay here?" She came to stand at the opposite side of the table. "At minimum, another week, more likely 10 days. The wound is healing cleanly, but if he moves too much too soon, he risks reopening it. He needs to be still." Selim looked at the wolf. "He doesn't do still well." "Neither do most of my patients," she said. "That's why the clinic has walls." He glanced up at her. That almost expression again, the shadow of something that in another face might have become a smile, but in his stopped just before it arrived, like a word held back at the last moment. "I could stay," he said, "here during the days, if it would help to have someone with him." She looked at him, someone with him, or someone watching me work. He held her gaze. "Both," he said. He said it without apology, which she appreciated more than if he had made one. She thought about it. She was not accustomed to having people in her clinic while she worked. Not because she was secretive, she had no particular reason to be secretive, but because she had spent a long time building a way of working that required a certain kind of quiet, the kind that came from being alone in the right way, and she was protective of it. Not defensively protective, just aware of it, the way you are aware of something that keeps you functioning. "You can sit in the corner," she said. "The chair over there, you can talk to him quietly. If you need to make a phone call, go outside." He nodded. "And you don't ask me questions while I'm working," she said. "If you have questions, you save them." He sat in the corner chair, which was not a comfortable chair. It was a functional chair, plain wood with a thin pad, and he sat in it the way he stood at the fence, without complaint, without fidgeting, without making his presence into a demand for attention. He spoke to the wolf quietly in a voice too low for her to make out words, which she assumed was intentional, and the wolf listened with its ears angled toward him and its body, gradually releasing the subtle, continuous tension that injured animals carry in their muscles even when they are resting. She watched this between her other tasks from the corner of her eye. She had seen people talk to animals before. She had seen it done badly, which was most of the time too loud, too cheerful, too obviously for the benefit of the human who was doing the talking and not the animal being talked at. She had seen it done well occasionally by people who had a real relationship with a particular animal and knew how to exist in that relationship without performing it. Selim fell into neither category. He talked to the wolf the way he talked to everything, she suspected, directly, without excess, with his full attention. He was not trying to comfort the wolf. He was simply in conversation with it. She went about her morning. At 11, she brought out 2 cups of coffee without being asked. She set one on the table at the edge of the room and went back to what she was doing and did not make a thing of it. He picked it up without making a thing of it either. Around noon, she was at her desk in the back corner updating records when she heard him say, from the chair, "You said questions at the end." She looked up. "Yes." "Were you always here, in Ironville?" She put down her pen. "I grew up here," she said. "I left when I was 19, I came back when I was 26. "Why did you come back?" She looked at him steadily. "Why did you want to know?" He tilted his head slightly. "Because most people who leave places like this do not come back." "What kind of place is this to you?" "Heavy," he said. "Ironville is a heavy place. There is history in it that presses on everything." She looked at the wall in front of her for a moment. "I came back because there was work here that needed doing and no one was doing it," she said. It was true. It was also not all of it. She left the rest where it was. He did not press. "Why do you stay?" she said. 3 territories is a significant amount of ground. You could be almost anywhere." "I am responsible for those territories," he said. "Responsible people stay where they are needed." "And you are needed here." "Yes." She picked up her pen again. "What happens to the territories if something happens to you?" The question was not delicate, and she had not intended it to be. She dealt in practical realities. What happens to the animal if the dressing fails? What happens to the situation if the surgery is not enough? What happens to the structure when the thing holding it together is gone? These were not hypothetical questions. They were the questions that determined how carefully you worked. Selim was quiet for a moment. She glanced over and he was looking at the wolf. "There are others who could hold them," he said. It would be harder, there would be conflict, but it would be managed. That's not a very reassuring answer. You asked for an honest one, he said. She did not say that she had not technically asked for reassurance. She filed it. They stayed in the same room for 2 hours, Selim in the corner and Myra at her work, and the quality of the silence between them was not uncomfortable. She noticed that, in the way she noticed most things, with the part of her attention that ran underneath the part that was focused on her work, continuously cataloging the information the room gave her. She had spent years developing that running catalog, that ambient awareness of what was happening around her while she concentrated on what was directly in front of her. It was the thing that had kept her from being caught off guard in difficult situations, usually. What she noticed was that Selim's silence did not press. Some silences pressed, they asked without words to be filled, to be relieved of their own weight. His did not. It sat in the corner of the room with the same quality of deliberate placement as the man himself, and it required nothing of her. She found, by the end of the 2 hours, that she was more rested than she usually was by noon. That was new. At 1:30 he stood. He said tomorrow then, not a question. Tomorrow, she confirmed. He left. She sat in the clinic for a few minutes after the sound of his footsteps faded from the gravel. The wolf looked at her. I know, she said. On the 4th day, while she was changing the wolf's dressing and Selim was in the corner, he asked her how she had learned to do this, what she did. She answered while she worked, because by now she had established that he understood the rule about talking while she worked, that questions were allowed if she was doing something routine, not if she was doing something that needed her full attention, and she had stopped needing to enforce the distinction because he had figured it out without being told. She told him about the rehabilitation center up north, about the woman who had run it, a fierce 70-year-old who had built it from nothing on a piece of land that no one else wanted. She told him about the first wolf she had ever treated, which had been a bad experience in the sense that the wolf had not survived, and how that experience had rearranged something in her, not broken it, but rearranged it, the way a bad fall rearranges your relationship with heights. You keep doing it anyway, he said. It was not a question. The alternative is to stop, she said. I've thought about it. I don't know what I would do instead. I think I would be worse at most other things. Most people would find work where the things they cared for did not die sometimes. Most people care for things that can tell them what they need, she said. I work with animals, they can't, so the margin for error is different. You have to accept that going in, or you can't do it at all. He was quiet for a moment. You accept it. I don't accept it happily, she said, but yes. She finished with the dressing and stepped back. The wolf's wound was looking significantly better. The skin around the sutures had lost its swollen, red-edged quality and was settling into the cleaner, pale color of healing tissue. She would not say she was surprised. She did not surprise easily, but the speed of the recovery was beyond what she had initially projected, and she had been projecting conservatively. She looked at the wolf. The wolf looked back at her. You are healing very fast, she said to it, in the same matter-of-fact tone she used for all her medical assessments. Selim, from the corner, said nothing. But she felt him look at the wolf in a way that had something careful and closed in it, the way a person looks at a topic they are deciding not to open. She filed that. On the 5th day she found him at the front door of her clinic at 8 in the morning with 2 cups of coffee from a thermos he had brought with him. He offered her one. She accepted it. They stood on her porch in the thin November light, not talking, and drank their coffee, and she looked at the frost on the grass of her yard and thought about the wolf's continued recovery, and about Dolar's soup, and about what Selim had said about the word responsible. She thought about all of these things separately, and then she thought about them together, and she noticed that they connected in ways she had not yet fully traced. What was he doing out there, she said. You're second on Route 9 in the flooding. Selim looked at his coffee, running a boundary check. We had reports of something crossing into the Eastern Territory. He went to verify. Alone. He preferred to work alone at night. A pause, past tense at the moment. At the moment, she said, because he is on my surgical table and not running boundaries. Yes, and whatever crossed into your Eastern Territory is still a matter I am addressing, he said. He said it flatly, not closing the subject down angrily but drawing a line around it with the particular precision of someone who knew exactly which information belonged where. She did not push it, she had her own version of those lines, she respected other people's. "Is that what you spend your days doing?" she said, "addressing matters in 3 territories?" "Most of my days," he said. "And yesterday and today you are here instead." He looked at her. "I rearranged my schedule. For the wolf." He looked at his coffee again. "For several reasons," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she took her empty cup inside and went to start her day. She was going to need to think about that. She filed it with the other things she was thinking about and went back to work. Dollars came back on the 6th day with bread she had baked herself and the expression of someone who had been doing additional thinking since their last conversation. She sat at Myra's kitchen table and folded her hands and looked at the window for a moment before she looked at Myra. "Has he been coming here?" Dollars said. "He has," Myra said. "Every day. Every day." Dollars was quiet. She unfolded her hands and folded them again. "And you let him in?" "He stays in the corner and talks to the wolf and drinks coffee," Myra said. "It's not complicated." "Myra," Dollars said, not unkindly, in the tone of someone about to say something that the other person might not want to hear, which in Dollars' vocabulary was the same tone she used for everything, because she had decided long ago that things worth saying were worth saying directly. "I know there's more to tell me," Myra said. "I can see it, tell me." Dollars looked at the window again. "The reason Selim holds 3 territories without conflict," she said slowly, "is partly because of who he is and partly because of what his position means among the packs. There are old laws, very old, not written anywhere most people have access to, that govern the packs in this region. Laws about territory, about protection, about what certain actions mean." Myra said nothing, she was listening. "One of those laws," Dollars said, "concerns aid, the giving of aid. There is a law that has been on record in the pack histories since before anyone alive today was born that describes what it means when a person outside a pack provides serious aid to a wounded pack member, especially a wounded second." Myra felt something in the room change, not physically, not in any way she could have pointed to, but the quality of the air, the quality of her own attention, shifted into a different register. "What does it mean?" she said. Dollars looked at her directly. "It depends on circumstances. The law is specific. It requires aid given freely, meaning without being asked and without payment expected. A wounded second specifically. The alpha present and aware of the aid as it occurs. And a crossing, the aid giver must carry the wounded second across some kind of boundary, a territorial line, a threshold." Myra sat very still. "In the rain," she said, almost to herself, "on Route 9, which is the territorial boundary?" Dollars said nothing. "He was there," Myra said. "He was there that night. I didn't see him, but he was there. He saw me bring the wolf across." "He would have known," Dollars said quietly. "He would have known what it meant the moment it happened." Myra was quiet for a long time. "What does it mean?" she said again. "Concretely, what does the law say happens?" Dollars took a breath. "The person who gives that kind of aid to a second, witnessed by an alpha, becomes, the word in the old language is something like shielded. It means you are under the alpha's protection, not because you asked for it, not because you belong to the pack, because you did an act that the law says creates a bond of obligation. No one within those 3 territories would be permitted to harm you or threaten you. Anyone who tried would be answering to Selim." The silence in the kitchen was very complete. Myra looked at the table, she looked at the window, she looked back at Dollars. "I didn't know," she said. "I did not know any of this existed." "No," Dollars said, "you didn't." "But he knew." Dollars held her gaze. "Before you picked up the phone to call Gary, Selim knew." The words landed quietly, the way certain things land that do not need volume to carry weight. Myra sat with them. "He watched me," she said, not angrily, just precisely, just naming what had happened. "He watched me pull the wolf through 3 inches of mud and get him into my truck and drive him here, and he knew that I didn't know what I was doing, what it was creating, and he didn't say anything." "No," Dollars said. "And then he stood at my fence for 2 days. "Yes, and I gave him coffee." "Myra," Dollars said, and there was something in her voice that was not pity exactly, but something close to it in the direction of tenderness. "Don't," Myra said. She said it without heat. She just needed a moment that was not someone else's emotion in it. She sat quietly and processed what she had just been told, which was her method for dealing with information she had not wanted. You absorbed it properly first, before you decided how you felt about it. She absorbed it. It sat in her chest with a particular weight. Not anger, not yet, not primarily, something more complicated than anger. She had thought she had understood the situation to be simple. An injured wolf, a worried man, a clinic that did its job. She had understood herself to be in the situation she was always in, the person who fixed what was broken and asked nothing in return except to be left to her work. She was not in that situation. She was in a different situation that she had not chosen and had not been told about. "What are my options?" she said. "The law can't be undone," Dollars said. "The act was witnessed, it's established." She paused. "But there's no contract here, Myra. You're not bound to anything. The protection exists whether you want it or not, but you don't owe anything for it. You can tell Selim to stay off your property. You can refuse to see him. The law gives you something. It doesn't take anything from you." Myra nodded slowly. "What are you going to do?" Dollars said. Myra looked at the window again. Outside, the November light was pale and clear, the rain finally gone for the first time in 6 days, and the wet yard glittered with it. "I don't know yet," she said. "I'm going to finish the morning first." Dollars nodded. She stood, pressed Myra's shoulder once briefly, and left. Myra sat at the table for 10 minutes, exactly 10 minutes. Then she stood, walked to the clinic, and went in. The wolf was awake and watching the door. It watched her as she moved to the table, tracking her with those pale gold eyes. She stood beside the table and looked at the wolf for a long moment. "Did you know?" she said. The wolf held her gaze. "Right," she said. Selim arrived at 9 as he had been arriving every morning. He came through the unlocked clinic door and stopped when he saw her face. She was standing in the center of the room with her arms crossed, not defensively, just because she needed to be standing somewhere, and this was the place she was standing. He stopped. He read her expression. Something in his own closed. "You know," he said. "I know," she said. He did not look away. He did not offer an immediate explanation or an excuse. He stood with what he had done and let her look at him. "You were there," she said, "that night on Route 9. "Yes, "And you knew what it meant when I carried him across." "Yes, "And you didn't tell me." "No," he said, "I didn't." She uncrossed her arms and put them at her sides. "Why not?" He was quiet for a moment, not evasively quiet, carefully quiet the way he was careful with words. "Because," he said, "if I had told you, you would have had to choose, whether to help him knowing what it would mean, or whether to leave him knowing you couldn't tell Gary and his crew where to put a wolf that size. And I did not want to put that choice on you." She looked at him. "You made the choice for me instead." "I did," he said. "That was wrong. I know it was wrong." The directness of it stopped her. She had prepared for defenses, for justifications, for the kind of logic that sounds almost reasonable but that she would have been able to take apart if she tried. She had not prepared for, "I know it was wrong." "Then why?" she said. He looked at her, and for the first time since she had known him, which was not long but was intense in the way that 6 days of close proximity to a person makes time feel, she saw something in his face that was not composed, something that had the quality of an admission, not about the law, about something underneath the law. "Because he was dying," he said, "and you were the only person for 3 miles who could stop it, and I couldn't ask you because asking you would have changed what you did, and if you had chosen to leave him because of the law, He stopped. He looked at the wolf on the table. "I would have understood," he said. "I would not have blamed you. But I could not ask the question that might result in that answer." Myra stood in the middle of her clinic and listened to a man explain why he had made a decision he knew was wrong and had done it anyway. And she knew the shape of that decision, because she knew the shape of making a choice that was not clean, that was not right exactly, but that was the only available choice when the alternative was something you could not accept. She had made those choices. She had made them at 2 in the morning on a rainy road with a too large wolf and no help coming. She looked at the wolf. "Is he really your second?" she said. "He is my brother," Selim said, "by every measure that matters." She looked at the wolf for another moment. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. "Okay." "I am angry," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I am going to stay angry about it for a while." "That is fair," he said. But what's done is done, she said, and the wolf needed help and I gave it. The reason behind that choice is mine and it doesn't change based on information I didn't have at the time. I did what I would have done anyway. She paused. Probably. He looked at her for a long moment. Probably, he said, and it was almost something. Sit down, she said. I have work to do. He sat in the corner chair. She went to work. The morning passed with the same productive quiet as the days before it, except that the anger she had named was present in the room, not loudly, not as a disruption, but as a thing that existed and had been acknowledged, and was therefore not a weight on the conversation the way unacknowledged things become weights. She worked, he sat, the wolf healed. At the end of the morning she said, without looking up from her records, the law that Dollars described, the protection, what does that mean practically if someone wanted to threaten me? Selim said, no one in these 3 territories would be able to harm you without answering to me directly. But outside the territories, that is a longer conversation, he said. But outside the territories is a smaller problem than you might think. She looked up. Why? Because my territories cover most of what matters in this region, he said, simply, not boasting, just stating a fact the way he stated most things as clearly and accurately as he could manage. She looked back at her records. Good to know, she said. And she meant it. On the 7th morning, everything changed. Myra was at the surgical table at 6:30 when the wolf stood up. Not rose slowly, not attempted to shift position. Stood, all 4 legs steady, with a completeness of movement that should not have been possible a week after the injury she had treated. She saw it out of the corner of her eye and turned, and for a moment she simply stood and watched. The wolf stood on the table and looked at her. She looked back. You shouldn't be doing that, she said. The wolf's tail moved, the same controlled sweep as before. She checked the wound site. The sutured area was fully closed and the skin around it was clean and healthy, showing none of the vulnerability she would have expected in a wound this recent. The tissue looked weeks rather than days into the healing process. She ran her hands carefully along the wolf's side, checking the muscles, checking for any sign of strain or reopening, and found nothing, only the solid warmth of an animal that was, for all the evidence her hands and training could produce, significantly more recovered than it should be. She took a breath. She stepped back. All right, she said. She had learned over the years that the things she could not explain in her work tended to fall into one of 2 categories: the things that were genuinely mysterious and required her to change her understanding of something, and the things that were not mysterious at all but simply required more information than she currently had. She did not know which category this fell into. She put it in the second provisionally and kept working. She was making notes when Selim arrived at 9. She heard him stop just inside the door and she knew, without turning around, that he had seen the wolf standing. You might have mentioned, she said, still writing, that he heals faster than a normal wolf. Silence. She turned. Selim was standing just inside the door, and his expression had the quality she had come to recognize in him as its equivalent of surprised, a certain stillness at the edges, a slight widening of focus. He was looking at the wolf with something that moved between relief and a kind of controlled wonder. I was not expecting this so soon, he said. Neither was I, she said, but here we are. She set down her pen. Tell me. He looked at her. I know there are things you haven't told me, she said. It was not an accusation this time. It was just a statement, an observation of the pattern she had been tracking. I'm not interested in everything all at once. But I am asking you to tell me, now, what I need to know about the animal in my clinic so that I can make informed decisions about his care. Selim was quiet for a moment. Then he came fully into the room, past the door, and stood with his hands behind his back, looking at the wolf. Our healing is faster, he said, more resilient. An injury that would take a human or a standard wolf weeks to recover from will take us significantly less time. It has always been this way. Us, she said. He looked at her. You and the wolf, she said. You're not just the alpha of a pack, you're the same as the wolf. It was not a question. It was something she had been putting together since the second day, piece by piece, the way she put together a diagnosis, carefully, without forcing any individual piece into a position it did not fit. This piece fit. Yes, he said. She nodded, she absorbed it. She looked at the wolf, and then she looked at Salem, and she let the new information settle over what she already knew about both of them. "That explains some things," she said. "Does it change anything?" he said. She thought about it. "Not about the care he's receiving," she said. "I adapt to what I'm working with, that's the job." She picked up her pen again. "How long before he can be safely moved?" "By your standards, not mine." "At this rate," Salem said, 2 or 3 days. "Then we have 2 or 3 days," she said. "How does the healing work exactly? Is there anything I should be doing differently?" He blinked, just once, just briefly, and she had the impression that no one had ever asked him that question in exactly that way. Not "what are you?" Not "what does this mean?" but "how can I help?" "The wound needs air," he said. "Less dressing in the final stages. The body's own process is sufficient." "Fine," she made a note. "I'll adjust the treatment." She adjusted the treatment. The morning moved forward as mornings had been moving forward, but with a slightly different texture to it, because the room now held a conversation that had happened rather than one that was waiting to happen, and the weight that had been sitting in the space between them had become something easier to move around. The wolf was standing for most of the morning. She let it stand. It walked to the end of the table and she held her breath, and it was fine. Its gait was careful, but its legs were sound. She documented this as rapid tissue regeneration, consistent with species-specific physiology, adapting treatment plan accordingly, and noted to herself that this was the most careful sentence she had ever written in a medical record. At 11, Salem said, "When he is strong enough, he will want to speak to you himself." Myra looked up. "The wolf." "Ren," he said. "His name is Ren." She looked at the wolf. "He has a different shape than you do in the clinic." "He prefers this form in certain contexts," Salem said. "He says it is more efficient." The tone was the same one she had heard from people talking about siblings who did things in ways the speaker found mildly inexplicable but not worth arguing with. "When he's ready," she said. She was not, she assessed, as unsettled by any of this as she perhaps should have been. She examined this. She thought it had something to do with the wolf itself, that she had spent a week sitting with this animal, adjusting to its quality of presence, its particular way of being aware of a room, and by the time the information arrived to explain the quality, she had already made her accommodation to it. The information was, in a sense, just catching up to what she already knew in her hands. At 2 in the afternoon, she was in the back room when she heard the clinic door open with a different quality than Salem's entries had, a sound that carried something edged with it, a cold front of intention. She came out. 3 men she did not know. They were standing inside her clinic door, which they had opened without knocking, which she filed immediately. 2 of them were large, carrying themselves in the way of people who were accustomed to size being enough. The third was smaller, older, with a careful face, the face of a man who thought before he moved and moved before you expected him to. Salem was already on his feet. The smaller man looked at him first, then at Myra, and his expression was the kind that had made a great many calculations before he walked through the door. "This is a private clinic," Myra said. "You didn't knock." The smaller man looked at her. "My apologies," he said, in a tone that was not apologetic. "I'm looking for someone. I understand there is an injured pack member being treated here." "This is a wildlife clinic," Myra said. "I have a number of patients. If you'd like to inquire about a specific animal, you can call the main number and schedule a consultation." The man looked past her at the wolf on the table, Ren, standing now facing the door. He looked at the wolf for a moment and something shifted in his expression. Not fear, something more calculated than fear. "I need to speak to him," the man said. "He's a wolf," Myra said. "He's been through surgery this week. He doesn't take visitors." The man's gaze moved to her, and she saw in it the kind of patience that is not actually patience but the practiced appearance of it. "I think you may not fully understand the situation you're in," he said. His voice was quiet. "This clinic, this property, it sits on a very interesting piece of land. The Ironville boundary runs right along your fence line." "I know where my fence line is," Myra said. He smiled slightly. "Then you know this property could be argued to fall within multiple territorial claims, depending on how one interprets the old survey lines." He paused. "I represent interests that have a claim to this territory, a legitimate claim." "You can take your legitimate claim to whatever authority recognizes it," Myra said. "And you can do it after you leave my clinic, which I'd like you to do right now." The 2 large men had not moved. Selim had not moved either, but his stillness was a different kind from theirs, not holding back, not waiting for a signal, just very carefully not doing anything yet. The small man looked at Selim. "You know who I represent," he said. "Yes," Selim said, "I know." "Then you know this conversation needs to happen." "Not here," Selim said, "not in this building." The man looked at the wolf again, then at Myra, then back at Selim, and something behind his eyes made a decision. "Call it a courtesy visit," he said. "We'll be in touch." He looked at Myra one more time. "You should think carefully about whose roof you're working under. Lines move in this region. They have been known to move quite suddenly." They left. The door closed. Myra stood in the center of her clinic and said nothing for a moment. Then she turned to Selim. "Who are they?" she said. "The Eastern faction," he said, "the ones I mentioned." The thing crossing into the territory. His jaw was set in a way that was different from his usual composure, tighter, carrying something in it. "That was a threat," she said. "Yes, to me specifically." He looked at her. "To this clinic, to this location, to you by extension." He paused. "They were testing, seeing whether I would respond here in your space or wait for a different setting. And you waited." "I did not want to put you in the middle of something physical," he said. "Not here." She looked at the door. She felt in the still air of the clinic the clear, cold shape of the situation she was in, and she let herself feel it fully, because pretending it was smaller than it was had never been a strategy she could maintain. "You said," she said, "that this protection the law created, that no one in the territories would be able to harm me." "Yes," he said. "They are from the territories." "They are from a disputed edge of the territories," he said, "which is why they are a problem." She looked at him. "How much of a problem?" He looked back at her steadily. "Enough that I have been managing it for 3 months, he said, "and enough that Ren was out on that boundary the night he was injured." She thought about this, the wet grass on Route 9, the piece of barbed wire that was not supposed to be in the flood water, an animal running hard and not seeing what was in the water. "Was it deliberate?" she said. "What happened to him?" The silence that followed was its own answer. She stood very still. "How long?" she said. "Before it becomes more than a test." He looked at the door where the men had gone. "I do not know, but that visit was a step. They wanted me to see that they knew where Ren was. They wanted you to know they could come here." "And now I know," she said. "Now you know," he said. She went to the window and looked outside. The yard was empty. The gravel road was empty. The trees at the edge of the property moved slightly in the wind. She turned back to the room. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. "I need you to tell me everything," she said. "Not because I'm frightened, because I work better with complete information. You have already seen what happens when I don't have it." She held his gaze. "Everything, Selim." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down in the corner chair and he began. He told her about the Eastern faction. He told her cleanly, without hedging, the way she had asked, starting from the beginning, which was 3 months ago, when scouting reports from the eastern boundary began returning with inconsistencies. Animals displaced, scent markers crossed without acknowledgement, the kind of gradual, careful pressure that a faction applies when it is testing the response time and patience of a territory it wants to claim. The faction was led by a man named Harlan Cross. He was not the man who had come into her clinic, that had been a representative, an intermediary. Harlan Cross himself had not yet appeared in any of the interactions, which was a strategy Selim described as deliberate. Someone who stays invisible in the early stages either plans to stay invisible throughout, which meant they were playing a long, cautious game, or they were waiting for a specific moment to make themselves known. Selim believed it was the second. Harlan Cross had a claim on a portion of the Eastern Territory that was, as the representative had said, arguable. The old survey lines in this region were not precise, and the pack histories recorded the eastern boundary differently depending on which generation had drawn the record. Cross had found those discrepancies and was using them the way a person uses a small crack in a foundation, not immediately, not dramatically, but continuously, with patience and with intent. "Why hasn't this been resolved?" Myra said. She was sitting on the edge of the desk. He was in the corner chair. The wolf, Ren, was standing at the far end of the table, listening. "Because resolution requires either a negotiation that Cross is not prepared to enter honestly, or a confrontation that I am not prepared to initiate without clear justification, Selim said. He knows that. He is manufacturing the justification slowly. What happened to Ren on Route 9, Myra said. Selim was quiet for a moment. The flooding was real, he said, but the barbed wire in the water was not accidental. There is no old fencing in that section of the drainage, it was placed. She sat with that. They hurt him deliberately, she said. They arranged for him to be hurt, Selim said. There is a technical difference in terms of how it holds up in pack law, but the practical meaning is the same. She looked at Ren. Ren was looking at the door, steady and alert, the way he had been looking at things since he regained full consciousness. And coming here today, she said, to my clinic, was a message, Selim said, that they know where he is, that they know the boundary argument extends to this property, that they have calculated whether I would respond here in your space in a context where responding physically would put you in the middle of it. They calculated correctly, she said. Yes, he said it without pleasure. But that won't last, she said. No, he said, it won't last. She was quiet for a moment, thinking through the shape of it. They wanted to come here specifically, not to find Ren, they already knew where he was. They wanted to see how I would react, whether I was someone who could be used to apply pressure to you. He looked at her with an attention that had a particular quality to it, the attention of someone who has been watching someone else figure something out, and who is tracking the figuring with a kind of care. Yes, he said. And can I, she said, be used that way? That depends, he said, on what you decide. She looked at the window. The November light was doing what November light does in the afternoon, going thin and flat and turning everything outside into a kind of still painting of itself. I'm not leaving, she said. He said nothing. My clinic is here, she said. I built it here, I have patients here. The fact that someone with a territorial dispute has decided my property is a useful piece on a map their drawing does not change any of those facts. She looked back at him. I am not a piece on anyone's map. Something in his face changed, not dramatically, a settling of something. No, he said, you're not. What I need from you, she said, is information going forward. If something changes, if the situation escalates, if my patients are at risk, I need to know immediately. Not after you've decided how much I need to know, immediately. Yes, he said. And I need to know what you're planning to do about Cross. He looked at his hands for a moment. I am going to force a resolution, he said. The kind that Cross has been trying to avoid. He wants to claim the Eastern Territory through accumulated pressure and territorial confusion. I am going to make the boundary clear in a way that cannot be misread. How? Officially, he said, through the Pack Council. There are procedures for this, they take time. Cross knows this too, which is why he is still moving carefully rather than directly. And in the meantime, she said. In the meantime, he said, I keep Ren here until he is strong enough to move, and I address anything that comes to this property personally. She looked at him. You plan to stay here? I plan to be nearby, he said. I will not enter your property without your permission. That was my position before, and it does not change. I'm not asking you to wait at the fence, she said. She said it plainly. He looked up. If there is a real threat to this property, you can be inside the boundary. That is a practical decision, not, she stopped, started again, not anything more complicated than that. He held her gaze for a long moment. Thank you, he said. The word sat between them simply, the same as the first time he had said it, the second day at the fence. The same quality of having been chosen carefully, without ceremony. She nodded once and went back to work. Ren was moved off the table that evening, at his own insistence, a slow, deliberate descent that she supervised closely and that he accomplished without any sign of strain. He settled on the thick mat she had laid on the clinic floor and stretched out with the deep, thorough ease of an animal that is returning to its body after a long absence. She brought him water, he drank. She brought him food, he ate. She sat on the floor about 3 feet away from him, not because she needed to be there, but because she had the instinct, after a week of this particular patient, that company was not unwelcome to him. She did not talk, she just sat. After a while Ren looked at her. The look held for a long time, longer than an animal usually holds a look, There was something in it, not quite an apology, not quite gratitude, not quite the simple animal recognition of a person who had helped it, something more layered. She looked back. "I know," she said, which was what she said when she did not know what else to say, and the situation did not require her to say more. Ren's ears shifted toward the door, then he put his head down on his front paws and closed his eyes. She stayed for another few minutes. Then she went to find Selim, who was on her porch, which he had begun to treat as the precise edge of his permitted space. Not inside without invitation, not at the fence line anymore either, but on the porch. She sat on the porch steps. He was standing at the rail. "He's settled," she said. "Good," Selim said. The evening was clear, the first truly clear evening in a week, and the stars were out over the ridgeline in the specific way that stars are out over mountains. Not decoratively, not like a painting of themselves, but massively, presently, in a way that made the mountain feel like a piece of something much larger than the mountain. They sat in the quiet of it for a while. "Dolars told me," Myra said, "that you hold 3 territories without war, that in 40 years no one had done it." He was looking at the ridgeline. "Yes." "How?" He was quiet for a moment. "Honestly," he said, "I did what I said I would do and did not say what I would not do. Most conflicts in territorial disputes happen because someone makes a promise they cannot keep, and the gap between the promise and the reality is where the conflict lives." He paused. "I simply did not make promises I couldn't keep. It sounds simple. It is not simple." "No," she said, "it isn't." She had her own version of that. She had said, to herself, and to the animals she worked with and occasionally to people, only what was true, and only promised what she could deliver, and she had done it for so long that it had become the structure of how she moved through the world rather than a choice she made each time. She thought about that, about 2 people who operated on the same fundamental principle, arriving at very different-looking lives. "You are going to have a fight," she said. "With Cross at some point. The council process may slow it, it won't stop it." "I know," he said. "Is there an outcome where you lose?" He looked at her. The question was not cruel. She was asking it the way she asked everything, as a real question, one that deserved a real answer. "There is always an outcome where I lose," he said. "That is the nature of the work." She nodded. "But I do not plan to," he said. She looked at the stars. "Good." They stayed on the porch until the temperature dropped enough that the air turned sharp and clear, and had an edge in it that belonged to the deep part of November rather than the beginning of it. Then she went inside. He stayed on the porch. She left the porch light on. On the 9th day, Ren became a person. She was in the clinic at dawn, earlier than usual because she had slept poorly, not from worry, or not only from worry, but from a general alertness that had settled into her since the visit from Cross's men and did not fully switch off even when she told it to. She was updating records and drinking coffee, and the clinic was dim and quiet, and she heard a sound she had not heard before. She turned. A man was sitting on the mat where the wolf had been. He was perhaps 30, perhaps a little older or younger, the kind of age that is hard to place on a face that carries a lot of experience. Dark hair, shorter than Selim's but with the same quality of being consistently wet-looking even when dry. Broad shoulders. The slightly dazed expression of someone returning from somewhere very far away. He was wearing the blanket she had put over the mat, arranged around his shoulders in the way of someone who grabbed the nearest available covering without thinking too carefully about it. He looked at her. "Hello," he said. His voice was rougher than Selim's, with a different texture, the voice of someone who talked more easily and more often. "Hello," she said. She noticed, calm. She catalogued this as information about herself. "I'm Ren," he said. "I know," she said. "Selim told me." He looked around the clinic slowly, taking in the organized equipment, the clean surfaces, the careful way everything was arranged. "This is your place," he said. "Yes, You're the one who pulled me out of Route 9. "Yes, He looked at her for a moment. "That was an extremely difficult thing to do," he said. "I weigh considerably more than I appear to." 212 pounds, she said. "I weighed you on the truck scale." Something crossed his face that was definitely a smile, quick and unguarded in a way that Selim's expression never quite was. "Of course you did," he said. She found clothes for him. She kept a supply of things that people had left over the years, and she found trousers and a shirt that were approximately the right size, and she left them outside the clinic door and knocked to let him know they were there, and she went to make more coffee. He came into the kitchen 20 minutes later, dressed, his hair damp from the tap, looking significantly more coherent. She put coffee in front of him and he wrapped his hands around the mug the same way Selim did, and she thought, brothers, every measure that matters. I need to apologize, he said. She sat down across from him. For what specifically? For creating a situation, he said. I should have been more careful. I knew that stretch of boundary was being watched and I went out anyway at night alone. He looked at the coffee. Selim argued with me about it. He argued and you went anyway, she said. I was very confident, he said, with a self-awareness that had some humor in it. I was wrong about how confident I should have been. You nearly died, she said. It was simple, it was just a fact. Yes, he said, I know. He looked up at her. And you prevented that, without being asked, without knowing any of what I was in the middle of a flood at midnight alone. She looked at him steadily. I do this work, she said, that's what it involves. It does not usually involve this specific category of patient, he said. No, she agreed, but the principles are the same. He was quiet for a moment. Selim is, he paused, chose his words. He hasn't sat with anyone the way he's been sitting with you in a very long time, maybe ever. She held his gaze without changing her expression. I'm noting that, he said, not as an observation with an agenda, just as a fact. Noted, she said. He smiled again. It was a good smile. It was the smile of someone who found the world genuinely interesting and could not quite prevent that from showing. Can I ask you something? He said. You can ask. When they came here, Cross's men, you told them to leave. Yes. You knew what they were, what they could do. I knew they were men who walked into my clinic without knocking, she said. That was enough. He looked at her for a long moment, then he laughed. It was a quiet laugh, real, the kind that comes from a place of actual surprise. Right, he said, of course. She refilled his coffee. There's something else, he said when she sat back down. He said it with a different quality, quieter, more careful, about why Selim was on Route 9 that night. She waited. He wasn't there by chance, Ren said. He knew I was going out to that boundary. He followed at a distance because I had refused to take backup and he was not willing to have me completely alone out there. He looked at his hands. He saw the whole thing. He saw you find me and he saw what you did, and he stood in the rain in the dark watching you drag me through the mud for 30 minutes before he made himself leave, because if he had come forward it would have changed what was happening. She sat with this. He would have taken you from me, she said. If he came forward, the law wouldn't have applied. The law would have been irrelevant, Ren said. He would have carried me himself and brought me to his own healers, and you would have been, he paused. Just a person who saw something unusual on a road at night. She thought about that, about the parallel version of that night where she called Gary and helped with the report and drove home and thought about it occasionally, the enormous black wolf that had been there and then not there, the way some things are unexplained and filed under unexplained and left there. He chose to let me help, she said. He chose not to interfere, Ren said, which for Selim is the same thing. He does not easily choose not to interfere with things he is responsible for. He looked at her directly. I have never seen him do it before. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, how long has he been alone, running 3 territories? Ren looked at the table. 7 years since the last, since things changed. He has not, he stopped, tried the sentence from a different direction. He is not someone who asks for things for himself. He gives everything to the territories and to the pack and to the work. 7 years is a long time to give everything without any of it coming back. She did not say anything to this. She did not know yet what the right thing to say to it was. I'm not trying to tell you what to do, Ren said. I'm just, he paused. I owe you more than I can pay back. I want you to have accurate information. She looked at him. What happened 7 years ago? He held her gaze for a moment. Ask him, he said. When you're ready, he'll tell you. She nodded. They sat in the kitchen for another hour. He talked easily and she found it required no effort to listen. He had the quality different from Selim's of someone who was good at filling space with the right kind of sound, not noise, conversation. He told her small things about the territories, about the pack, about Selim, in the way of someone who trusts the person he is talking to without quite knowing why, and has decided to act on the trust rather than wait until he is sure. She told him about the clinic, about the rehabilitation center up north, about the red fox in the drainage ditch. He listened the way good listeners listen, not waiting for his turn, but actually receiving what she said. Selim appeared at 9 and stopped in the kitchen doorway and saw the two of them at the table, and something in his face went quiet in the way of a person standing in a scene they were not sure they were allowed to be inside. "He's been up since 6, Myra said without turning around. "I know," Selim said. He was looking at Ren. Ren looked back at him. Between them passed the particular silent communication of two people who had existed in each other's orbit for long enough that they no longer needed all the words. "You look like yourself," Selim said. "I feel like myself," Ren said, "mostly." "The clinic is better stocked than my place," Ren said to Myra. "I'm staying another week." "You are not," Selim said. "The healer says when I go," Ren said pleasantly. They both looked at Myra. "You can go when I say you can go," she said, "which based on current recovery will be in approximately 2 days. 3 days, Ren said. 2 days, she said. He sighed, 2.5. 2 days, she said again, and stood up to start her morning. Behind her she heard Ren say something low to Selim and Selim say nothing back, and then the sound of Selim's chair pulling out at the table, which meant he was sitting down for coffee, which meant the morning was arranging itself the way mornings had been arranging themselves, and which meant she thought that she was becoming accustomed to this. She was not sure what to do with that yet. So she put it in the waiting room of her attention, along with the other things she was still working out, and she went to open the clinic for the day. They came before dawn. Not Cross's representative this time, not intermediaries with careful faces and calculated words. 4 men who had no interest in having a conversation and who came to the gravel road of Myra's property in the dark and the quiet of 4 in the morning, when everything that was going to happen was supposed to happen fast. What they did not account for was that Selim had not slept. He had not been sleeping much in the nights since the representative's visit. He kept himself at the edge of the property, the porch, or the yard, or the gravel road, because he was waiting for the next move, and in his experience the next move always came before you were ready for it and came harder than the test run. He heard them on the road. He was off the porch and moving before they reached the gate, and what happened in the gravel road in the dark and the cold of 4 in the morning was something Myra did not witness directly because she was inside asleep, which was where she was supposed to be. She heard it, though she heard enough. She was up and in the kitchen with the porch light on and a hand on the phone before she fully understood what she had woken up to, and she stood at the kitchen window and watched the dark of the yard and the gravel road, and there was a period of perhaps 8 minutes during which she was in the particular grip of the kind of waiting that has no useful action available to it. She was not accustomed to that kind of waiting. She did not care for it. Then the yard was quiet, and then Selim appeared out of the dark, coming across the gravel toward the porch, and she could see by the way he was moving that he was not badly hurt, which she assessed quickly and with the specific relief of someone whose training has taught them to check for injury before they check for anything else. She opened the porch door before he reached it. He came inside and she looked at him properly in the kitchen light, a cut on his forearm not deep, bruising along his jaw that would darken by morning, nothing worse. "Sit down," she said. He sat at the kitchen table. She got the kit she kept in the kitchen cabinet, smaller than her clinic kit but sufficient, and she cleaned the cut on his forearm and dressed it while he sat still and let her work. She did not ask about the men on the road, not immediately. She was doing a job and she did the job. When she was done, she put the kit away. She put water on. She sat down across from him. "They're gone," he said. "I assumed," she said. "They will not come back," he said. "Not here, not directly." She looked at him. "How many?" "4," he said. She held his gaze. "Are you certain you're not badly hurt?" "Yes," he said. "The ribs," she said. "You're breathing slightly differently than usual." He looked at her. The expression on his face was the one that meant he was slightly surprised by her, which she had begun to recognize and which she did not make any particular thing of. "Bruised," he said, "not broken." "Bruised ribs still hurt," she said. "Yes," he said, "they do." The kettle finished. She made tea, which was what she made at 4 in the morning when coffee would not help and something warm was needed anyway, and she put a cup in front of him and sat down. "Tell me about 7 years ago," she said. He looked at her. "Ren said to ask you," she said. "I'm asking." He looked at the tea. "Her name was Claire," he said. "She was from outside the territories. She came in the way that people sometimes come in, not looking for the pack, not aware of what she had walked into, just someone who was in the region and whose path crossed ours." He paused. "We were together for 2 years. She knew what I was eventually. She knew the territories, the responsibilities, the work." Myra did not say anything. She let him go at his pace. "She left," he said, "not because she stopped caring, because she could not live with the weight of it. The territories and everything they required, the way every moment was managed toward responsibility, the way even an ordinary evening had a structure to it that left no room for." He stopped. "She said it was like living inside a machine, that I was not a bad machine, just a machine." The kitchen was very quiet. "7 years ago," Myra said. "Yes, and since then?" "Since then I have been very thorough about the work," he said. It was said without self-pity, just as a fact, the same way he described everything. She looked at him across the table. She looked at the cut on his arm, dressed and clean. She looked at his jaw. She looked at the quality of the tiredness in his face, which was not the tiredness of one bad night, but of a long arrangement with not enough rest. "You are not a machine," she said. He looked at her. "I have spent 10 days observing you," she said. "I am very good at assessment. You are not a machine. You are a person who has been running at machine-level output for 7 years because you made a decision after she left that the territories were enough and the work was enough and the responsibility was enough." She paused. "And it has been enough, in the sense that it has covered the space." She looked at him steadily. "It is not enough in the sense of being everything that should be there." He said nothing. "I am not saying this to be tender," she said. "I am saying it because it is accurate and because you are a person who operates on accurate information, and I am giving you accurate information." He held her gaze for a long time. "I know," he said eventually. "I know that." Outside, the dark was beginning to ease at the edges, the very first suggestion of a gray pre-dawn, and the birds that woke earliest were starting their preliminary sounds in the trees at the edge of the property. "I have not," Myra said, "had a great many people in my life either, by choice." She looked at the tea. "I built the clinic here because there was work to do, that is true, but I also came back to Ironville because it was the kind of place where a person could build a life that consisted of the work and not much else, and not have that felt as a problem by everyone around them." She looked up. "I understand the arrangement you've built. I have a version of it myself." He was looking at her in the particular way he had, completely, without the performed quality of attention that most people used, the kind that was really waiting. "What are you saying?" he said. She thought about it for a moment. She was not a person who said things she did not mean, or who said things she had not thought through, and so she thought through what she was about to say as she said it, testing each word. "I am saying," she said, "that 10 days ago I pulled a wolf out of Route 9 because that was what was needed, and I did not consider whether it was convenient. That is how I approach most things. And the result of that approach is that I now know you, which was not in any plan I had made, and I am not sure yet what I think about most of it, but I am not opposed to finding out." The kitchen was quiet for a long time. "That," he said carefully, "is the most measured expression of openness I have ever heard from another person." "I am a measured person," she said. "I know," he said, and there was something in the way he said it that was different from the usual way he said things, something that had warmth in it that he was not trying to conceal, something that came forward instead of waiting. "The ribs," she said. "Take the aspirin in the cabinet, top shelf left side, you know where it is by now." "I do," he said. He stood. He was taller in her kitchen than anywhere else somehow. The room made the fact of him more specific. He went to the cabinet. She sat at the table and listened to the first full bird of the morning start up properly in the trees outside. "Salem," she said. He looked at her from across the kitchen. "The representation to the Pack Council," she said. "When you make it, the boundary argument, do you have everything you need to make it clearly?" He tilted his head slightly. "The records are not complete. There are gaps in the survey documentation that Cross is exploiting." "Are there records from the adjacent properties?" the ones that were established before the pack boundary dispute started. He looked at her. Potentially. Dolar's Web has been in Ironville her whole life, Myra said. Her family has been here longer than that. If there are records on those adjacent properties, she would know about them. She keeps things. She has always kept things. She paused. I can ask her. He was looking at her with the expression that she had come to understand, meant he was taking something in, and was not immediately sure what to do with it. You would do that, he said. It would help resolve the situation, she said. I am interested in the situation being resolved. It is affecting my clinic, she paused, and other things. He stood in her kitchen with the aspirin in his hand, and the first light of the day beginning to come through her window, and he looked at her for a long, complete moment. Thank you, he said, for the third time. Each time it had landed differently. This time it landed in the same register as the information she had given him at the table, quietly, fully, without ceremony and without performance. Don't thank me yet, she said. Go rest. The cot is in the back room. The clinic is unlocked. He looked at her for another moment. Then he went. She heard the clinic door open and close. She sat at the kitchen table and drank her tea and watched the window go from dark to gray to the beginning of color, and she thought about all the things she was going to need to think about, and she thought about the fact that she was not, sitting here in the early morning of a difficult night, unhappy. That was new. She got up, found her phone, and called Dolars. Dolars answered on the second ring, as she always did. It's early, Dolars said. She did not sound surprised. I know, Myra said. I have a question about property records. Dolars had 3 wooden boxes of property records in her attic. She produced them at 9 in the morning in the organized, matter-of-fact way she produced everything, carrying one down the stairs herself, leaving the other 2 for Myra to bring, narrating their origin as they went. The boxes had been her grandmother's and before that her great-grandmother's. They contained, among other things, the original survey notes from when the first homesteaders had marked the land in this region, in a handwriting that was faded but legible, on paper that was old but had been stored dry. They sat at Dolars' kitchen table and went through them. Dolars knew which box to start with, which was the efficiency of a person who had looked at these things before and kept track. Myra went through the papers carefully, noting dates and descriptions and the old property boundary language that was its own specialized vocabulary. It took 4 hours. What they found was a surveyor's record from 1887 that described the eastern boundary of the land in detail so specific, using landmark trees, creek distances, rock formations, that it left almost no room for the ambiguity that Harlan Cross had built his claim around. The land that Cross was arguing fell within a disputed zone was, according to this record, clearly outside the territory in question. Myra photographed every page. She brought the photos to Selim at the clinic, where he was awake and sitting in the corner chair and looking somewhat better than he had at 4 in the morning. Ren was on the mat, awake and reading a paperback book that he had found somewhere on Myra's shelves and which he showed no sign of putting down for any reason. She handed Selim the phone with the photographs on it. He looked through them. He was quiet for a long time, then he looked up at her. This is everything, he said. This closes it. If this goes to the Pack Council, Cross has no argument. Then take it to the Pack Council, she said. He looked at the photographs again. These are your neighbor's records. Dolars is happy to have them used, Myra said. I asked. She said she has been waiting for someone to need them for something useful for 40 years. He handed the phone back. He held it for a moment before releasing it, a brief pause, a small thing, but there. Ren goes tomorrow, she said. Ren looked up from his book. I heard that. You were meant to, she said. I could argue for 3 days, he said. You could, she said. You would be incorrect. He sighed and went back to his book. She stood in the center of her clinic in the afternoon light and looked around at it, the organized equipment, the clean surfaces, the careful structure she had built over 4 years, the table where the wolf had lain, the corner chair where Selim had sat, the mat where Ren had spent the final days of his recovery reading her copy of a nature book she had purchased and never quite finished herself. It looked exactly as it had always looked. It also looked different in a way she could not have described precisely, because the difference was not in anything visible. It was in the way the room felt inhabited now, fully inhabited, the way spaces feel when they have been used for everything they were meant to be used for. She went to the window. Rain was coming again. She could see it on the ridgeline, the specific gray of rain arriving, moving down the mountain the way it always moved in November, in sheets that went sideways before they went straight down. She heard Selim come to stand beside her. He was looking at the same ridgeline. "Cross will push back when you bring the records to the council," she said. "He will," Selim said. "He will dispute the survey's authority or argue that the landmarks have moved. Neither argument will hold, but he will make them because that is how he operates. He extends everything as long as it can be extended." "How long will the council process take?" "Months," he said, "possibly through the winter." She looked at the rain on the ridgeline. "You'll be here," she said, "through the winter managing it." "Yes," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the rain. His jaw was bruised dark now, the way bruises go by afternoon, and his arm was dressed under his sleeve. And he looked in the afternoon clinic light, exactly like someone who had been carrying a very great deal for a very long time, and who was standing in a specific place for reasons that had, over 10 days, become more than one. "When this is settled," she said, "what does your schedule look like?" He looked at her. He was very still. "What do you mean?" he said. "I mean," she said, "that you have been at this clinic every morning for 10 days. You have rearranged 3 territories worth of responsibility to be here. I am asking what happens when the situation is resolved, and the reason you have been giving yourself to be here is no longer the reason." He held her gaze. "Are you telling me to go?" he said. "No," she said. "I am asking whether you would come anyway." He looked at her for a long time. The rain arrived at the window. The clinic was warm and lit, and the sound of it on the tin roof was the same sound it had been on the first night, the night she had stood at the window before Gary called, the sound like someone running on gravel who could not stop themselves. "Yes," he said. "Just the one word." She nodded. "Then figure out your schedule," she said. "I open the clinic at 8, I close at 6. If you want coffee, bring a thermos because I make 2 cups and both of them are mine." He looked at her for another moment, and she saw in his face the thing she had been seeing in fragments over 10 days, the composed surface and the thing underneath it that had been waiting, without making demands, without performing itself, just existing steadily and waiting for the right question. She had asked the right question. "Noted," he said. 2 mornings later, Ren stood in the clinic doorway dressed and ready and with the paperback tucked under his arm, and he shook Myra's hand in a way that lasted slightly longer than handshakes usually lasted, and he looked at her with the gold of his eyes that she had first seen in the wet grass of Route 9, and he said, "I'll be back in the spring. There's a great horned owl in the Eastern Territory that has been worrying me." "Bring it in," she said. "I will," he paused. "Thank you for all of it." "You already said that," she said. "I know," he said. "I meant it both times." He left. Selim stayed. He had said he needed to use her desk to complete some council paperwork, and she had said yes, which meant he was at the desk in the far corner of the clinic for most of the afternoon, writing, and she was at her work, and the clinic had the same quality of productive quiet it had developed over the past week, inhabited, shared, requiring nothing performative of either of them. She had a patient at 3, a pair of kestrels that a farmer out near the ridge had found in an old barn. She assessed them, treated the one that needed treatment, arranged the caging for them both. She did this with Selim at the desk, and him present in the way he was always present, attentive without interruption, aware without intruding. At 4:30 she had a phone call. It came from a road crew dispatcher, different from Gary, someone she had not spoken to before, who said there was an animal on the highway near the western boundary, and it was large and it was hurt, and no one was coming out for it in this weather. She was already reaching for her coat. "I have to go," she said. Selim was already on his feet, paperwork left mid-sentence on the desk. She looked at him. "You don't have to come," she said. He was putting on his jacket. "I know," he said. She looked at him for a moment, then she opened the clinic door. Outside, the rain was coming down the way it had come down the first night, sideways in sheets off the mountain. The gravel road was running with water. The ridgeline was invisible behind cloud. The truck was in the same place it was always in, backed up near the clinic's side door. She got in, he got in on the passenger side. She started the engine. "You're going to tell me to wait in the truck," he said. "No," she said. He looked at her. "I'm going to tell you to hold the flashlight," she said, "and move when I tell you to move, and not to talk when I'm working." He held her gaze. "Understood," he said. She pulled out of the gravel road and onto Route 7, and the rain came down and the headlights made a tunnel in the dark, and she drove the way she always drove in this weather, forward, steadily, without the option of turning back. He sat in the passenger seat and did not talk and did not fidget, and his presence in the truck was the same presence it had been in the corner chair and on the porch, and at the kitchen table, deliberate and steady, and requiring nothing extra of her. She drove. The rain came down. Whatever was waiting on the Western Highway waited for them in the dark, and they were coming, and they were going to handle it, and after that there would be the next thing, and they would handle that too, together or separately as it required. She drove. The mountain moved past them in the dark on both sides, old and solid and entirely indifferent to the rain, and the night was full of things that were worth going toward, and Myra Cole had never once in her life stopped going toward them. She was not going to start now,